This game, I have to say, I think this game is a contender for my favorite game of 2022.
Wow.
Hi everyone and welcome to another review by ThinkerThemer. I'm Amy, this is my wife Maggie, and together we review games from two different perspectives. I'm all about the mechanics and Maggie is all about the theme. And today we're excited to be reviewing Terracotta Army by designers Przemysław Fornell and Adam Kwapinski and publisher Board and Dice. So let's get into it.
Okay, so in Terracotta Army, we are artisans and sculptors tasked with the job of creating these amazing terracotta warrior clay sculptures, which are going to be protecting the emperor in the afterlife. So this is obviously based on the actual Terracotta Army that was discovered in China, where it's just an amazing, like we've actually been there, and it's just such an amazing, the scale of it is just outstanding. And so now we actually get to step into that world from the building side, from the clay
Building
molding,
a small version of it.
Well, but a pretty, it can get pretty busy and convoluted in the best possible way.
Now, the way you're going to get things done in this game is through the use of this action selection wheel. The way that this works, you can see that the top two layers of this wheel actually turn. One turns clockwise and one turns counterclockwise. And when you're taking your turn, you're simply going to decide where to put your meeple, whether that's an original tiny meeple, which is your craftsman, or one of your larger upgraded meeples, which are your artisans, onto one of the segments that you can see here on the wheel. So you can see where the meeples go on here. And before you do that, you have one choice, which is that you can pay 2 coin in order to move one of these wheels once in the direction that it goes in. So you could pay 2 coin and move the top one once to the left, or you could pay 2 coin and move the next layer once to the right, but you can't do both. You only get the opportunity to move one once. Once you've done that, you then get to take the actions shown in the segment where you've placed your meeple, and you resolve those actions from the inner circle through to the middle, and then finally the outer circle action. Some of the actions that are shown on the board are actually really straightforward. They're simply going to give you things in the game, and the main two things that you're going to need are coins, which you can see here that these spots are going to give you more coins, and clay. So this is the clay icon here, and these spots are just going to give you clay. When you receive clay, it is wet, and so you place it down in front of you with the wet side shown upright. However, at the end of each round, and this game plays for 5 rounds, your clay is going to dry out. So you either need to make sure that you use it in the current round, or in subsequent rounds, you're going to have to re-wet it using this action shown here with the little water vase here. And why do you need clay in this game? Well, I'm glad you asked, because we have all of these wonderful warriors over here, a selection of warriors of different types, and we are going to be using clay to build them and put them out into this grid of a mausoleum here in order to play essentially an area control game in multiple ways. I'll come back to that later, but that's why we need to collect clay in this game and to keep it wet as well so we can use it. The other things that you can do on this wheel is you'll see that there are these icons depicting different type of supervisors that are shown on the board. These supervisors are going to give you 2 things. One, they have an ability that triggers at the end of the round. So half of them will give you a coin at the end of the round, and we love coins because they help us manipulate the wheel when we want to turn it. And the other half are going to stop one of your clay from drying out. And that's really helpful too, because we need to keep our clay wet. So going here gives you those end of round benefits, but they also have really powerful abilities that trigger the first time you activate them, and then every subsequent time that you activate them from then onwards, because in order to appease these supervisors, you need to pay money to them. So the first time I activate this supervisor, I would choose my lowest supervisor token that I have in front of me, which is 1 coin at the moment. I would place it here and pay my coin, and and I would take this benefit, but for the rest of the game, whenever I have that symbol activated again, I can now activate that for free. You can see that as I start to try and appease the different supervisors, it's going to cost me more and more each turn in terms of coin value, so it gets more and more difficult to activate those bonuses. But now let's get back to those statues, because they really are going to make up most of the points in this game. So firstly, when you spend clay, you have to activate one of these actions on this inner wheel, whether that's going to pay 2 clay, 4 clay, 3 clay, in order to build one of these glorious statues and add it to the Terracotta Army. First of all, you're going to decide which type of warrior you're going to choose to put out onto the board. And there are 4 different types, and I'll come back to why that's important. But let's say I just choose this particular warrior, and I'm going to pop it into my player base color, and that identifies that warrior as mine. And then I get to put it out anywhere I like on this grid. I could put it right up here, over here, here. It doesn't really matter, but in fact it does matter, because where you go is going to really dictate how you score at the end of the round and at the end of the game. One of the first important things is to look at where these inspectors are located, because these inspectors are going to allow scoring within the column and within the row that they're facing. And so it's really important to have presence in the column and row where they're facing. They will naturally move every end of round. They're going to move up this track, but also there are options in the game for players to manipulate the position of these inspectors, meaning that you might think you're going to score because you're in the row or column that they're facing, but then someone moves them and it destroys all of your plans to score big at the end of that round. But the way that this works is if we continue to build up one of these columns here with different statues, at the end of the round, what we would do is, for this inspector, we would evaluate the area majority, and the person who has the most presence here, in this case I would as purple player, would get 7 victory points, and anyone who has presence there, i.e. at least one statue, will get 3 victory points. So you can see that you want to aim for trying to get majority. In the case of this row, I would instantly get the majority because I'm the only one in that row. The other bonus about building these statues is that you're going to get bonus victory points for doing so. And if you are to build the first of each type, it's going to be worth 8 victory points, but you can see that as you build subsequent of the same type, it's going to get fewer and fewer in victory points that you're going to get for building. And the reason for that is because of the second key way that this game scores, and that's in different clusters of the same type of statue. So imagine that we're continuing to build out, and this becomes quite a big cluster of one type of statue here. Imagine that we owned these. And interestingly, at the end of the game, this is when we're going to score for the same type of statue being clustered together. And the score is really interesting because each statue will become worth the amount of points equal to the number of players that have contributed to that cluster. So in a 4-player game, if everybody's contributed to that cluster, then each one of those statues is going to be worth 4 points. On top of that, the player who has the majority is going to get a lot more points, and every person that has presence in that area is also going to get some points. And so at the end of the game, we go through each of the clusters of like statues, and we score them, and that adds a lot of points at the end of the game. And that's why when we're building the same type, they become less in value because of that ability to score when they're next to each other. So we're keeping our eye on who is where and with what type of statue. We're keeping our eye on where those inspectors are and which columns and rows are going to score. But there's something else we need to keep our eye on, and that is which of these bonus scoring tiles are going to score each round and what's coming up. So there are 5 rounds in this game, and there are going to be 5 scoring tiles randomly drawn at the start of the game, and they give you objectives like have the most coin at the end of this round, have the most presence in this middle column have built the most arches, that one type of the statues. This one is have the most clay in your collection, whether it's wet or dry. And this one is having built the most, or have the most presence in this little quadrant of this area. And so you can see that, well, first of all, they become more and more powerful as you go. So the last goal is actually worth 13 victory points if you manage to get majority, whereas the first one's only worth 5. But they contribute a lot of points over the course of the game. And so you know what's coming, you know what you need to work towards, and that becomes quite a tight battle as well. And if the puzzle wasn't complex enough, well, now we have specialists. And these are some special type of statues that you can build in the mausoleum that are going to alter the puzzle and really add a layer of complexity to the way that this area scores. We've got different types that do different things. When a musician is placed out, it's going to give points to those in the same row and column. This kneeling warrior actually helps the warrior that it's facing break ties, which can be incredibly important when there's nowhere left to build on a column and there's a tie. Building one of those kneeling warriors can really help. We also have this one. This one acts like I think it's called a cloister.
The footman.
Yeah, but the cloister is the surrounding tiles, like in Carcassonne, where you're trying to get the full collection of things around, and basically the person who has majority around this piece is going to get 8 victory points. And then we have my favorite, which is the horse. And the horse is really cool because when you add it to the map, you're going to place it down and put one of your warriors on top of it, and it extends your warrior's presence. So it acts as an extension of whichever warrior is placed on top of it, meaning that now I'm present in all of these columns, and that can be really useful when scoring for the inspector. And so one final thing that I do want to mention is the weapon system. And the weapons all start face down. So we're going to have none of them active at the beginning of the game. And there are ways that you can unlock them, whether that's on the action wheel or whether that's through the use of a supervisor. And you're going to be able to turn them up and load them ready to use. And they are what you need to spend in order to build your specialist along with coin. And also they're going to unlock some additional benefits that you can get from building each type of statue. But I think that's enough to cover a broad overview of the game. So now let's talk about how we felt about it. Why don't we start with the key mechanic of this game, which is this unique wheel action selection system. It's the reason why I wanted to buy this game, and it's the reason why it was on our Gen Con most anticipated list. I had a fear about this wheel that it would cause analysis paralysis because it looked overwhelming, and with all the turning and different options and the fact that you're going to take 3 actions, I worried if it would just take me like half an hour to make a decision. But actually, the first thing I'll say is the iconography in this game is excellent.
Yeah, very solid.
Excellent, yeah.
Very easy to decipher once you kind of know what everything means. There's not that many icons, and even though it looks a bit busy, it's actually it's a handful of icons repeated in different amounts.
Yeah, super easy to understand. Also, a lot of the actions on this wheel are really one-off instant things that are super easy to understand. So just take 4 coin, take 2 clay, turn over this particular weapon. And so there's not a lot of complexity to the actions themselves. And so I was really pleasantly surprised at how swiftly the game moved on. I felt like even at 4 players, where there wasn't a lot of downtime. Often it came around to your turn and you're like, oh no, it's me again.
Well, yeah, and also because as the round progresses, the wheel starts, like you start taking up these locations. So by the time it gets to your turn, even though you don't know exactly what shape that wheel is going to be in, you may only have a few locations to go. And again, because there's only one movement that you could spend coin to shift, it doesn't make it an overwhelming sort of amount of choices.
Yeah, and actually that's a really good point about the craftsmen versus the artisans, or the small versus the big meeples, because the way this puzzle works is that if the space is clear, you can put down either meeple, but as soon as an artisan is placed into that space, whether first or second, then no other meeple can go in that space. And so if I'd put this here, then a smaller craftsman would not be able to take this space. And that is really interesting because there is only one place, one action on this wheel that allows you to upgrade your meeple. And I just find that creates a really tense option because it's in the spot where all of the other powerful actions are. So instead of upgrading your meeple, you get 4 coins, or you could build a statue, but instead you have to take this upgrade meeple action, and it feels like you're not doing much on that turn. But on the other hand, as other people are upgrading to those more powerful meeples, you're going to get left behind, and particularly if you let yourself get down in turn order. And I want to talk, I've got so much to talk about. I want to talk about turn order because so many times in this game, I let myself fall to the bottom in turn order because there's also one action on this board that allows you to take a token from this top spot. In a 4-player game, it would have 1, 2, and 3. That is the only way that you can guarantee that you will move up in turn order. If you don't do it, the turn order stays exactly the same. And there are multiple games where I played from the bottom of the pack, and when you do that, you absolutely need to upgrade your meeples.
And I would say sometimes it's not all about having first dibs, because sometimes actually having the last being the last person going means that you can affect the game because you now know the state of the game, and then you take that final blow as like, well, now I'm going to move that inspector, or I'm going to frustrate plans for everyone else in a different way. So I found, particularly in a 2-player game,
I would agree.
Sometimes actually going second was an advantage, not a disadvantage.
And why don't we, because we're talking about it, talk about the scaling of this game for 2 to 4 players. So interestingly, the only thing that changes is the number of meeples that you use in the game. So if you're playing a 2-player only game, you're going to have 5 meeples. If you're playing a 3-player game, you're going to have 4 meeples. And if you're playing a 4-player game, you're going to have 3 meeples. And that's simply so it increases the tension and so that everybody can play out all of their meeples on here. But it really changes the game experience. At a 2-player count, each of the 5 rounds, you have 5 moves. And because of that, you're able to get more done each round.
It's very plentiful.
You're
never like, oh, I'm going to run out of this.
I've got so much clay and so many coins.
And you're going to build so many statues, so much so that sometimes you may even run out of bases and you'll have to use a second base as a stand-in, towards the end.
Annoyance number 1 of this game.
It's not that big a deal.
No. This is a tiny thing. But I did run out of bases, and that was a really annoying, and I had to use a different colored base because in a 2-player game, it is very plentiful, like Maggie said. But the thing is, it's plentiful for your opponent too. And so it changes the dynamic of the game because you're just thinking, well, I've got so many options that I could do. Whereas in a 3 or in a 4-player game, where you only have 3 moves per round, you're so limited. If you haven't collected enough clay or thought about your next round, you're in trouble. And once by the time 3 other players have put their meeples out on the board, by the time it comes back around to you, you have so fewer options left on the wheel that it's just a different type of game.
My pet peeve is not that. My pet peeve is that you keep putting the meeples like that. I like putting them like that so that it's reflecting the size.
I do.
Look how satisfying it is to and then Amy always comes up and I'm like, why?
I do that in every
Completely
game.
unrelated to the game. This is just
they're standing. Anyway. That aside, what else do we really enjoy about this game? This puzzle is really fascinating. I think that in your first couple of games, it might seem a little bit overwhelming to think about how things are going to score at the end of the game, as well as thinking about how you're going to manipulate these inspectors and what they're going to score each round. And then on top of that, the end of round scoring. It's a lot to think about. You can't do everything, so you're going to have to pick and choose the things that you really want to win. But I learned in my early games that it is really important to think about that end game puzzle of the majority of a single type of statue. And so from the very beginning, you're trying to achieve everything else, but you're also thinking about that end game. And it's a really tight and interesting puzzle. I particularly love these inspectors.
Which is interesting because that's one of the area, because it becomes area majority, and it can be very take that-ish in the sense that you are shifting, you know, all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, I was going to get some points over here, and then someone moves and you're like, oh, come on, you know, that's a nasty thing to do. That's the area that I didn't enjoy as much. I loved how reminiscent of all the things that we love about Euros it was. Like, I really enjoy that sense of like, I'm physically building these statues and I'm getting to see them, you know, come to life. I love the elements of even like the clay. Like as you're spending your wet clay, you're putting some of it. So for example, if I used this space and I spent my 4 clay to build a statue, one of them goes on the dry side to that kind of local workshop, which to me signifies the offcuts or like the leftover clay that was sort of left back in that workshop. And those are clays that you can pick up. Like, so there's positions where, you know, if you're activating this this kind of space, supervisor space, you can then claim any 2 piles of dry clay, which you can end up with these massive piles of clay that then, you know, one wetting the clay action just gives you this play. So I love that because thematically I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, you're taking the offcuts and you're kind of bringing them to life. That felt very kind of building, creating, Euro thing to me. This actually, I enjoyed less, that moving of those dials and kind of going, haha, now I got the points. I'm like, come on.
I mean, it makes sense if you understand the way that Maggie enjoys games. Yeah. So she really enjoys and is quite good at the collecting of a single type, because that is everyone just racing to build, and the person who races to build the most is going to win. And it's not an aggressive, I'm going to take down your statue.
No.
It's just like, who's going to have the most at the end of the game, and I can see why you enjoy that part of the game. This one, you have the opportunity to manipulate what is going to score, and it can be really quite sad if right at the end of the round the person last in turn order is just going to move that, and suddenly instead of Maggie getting points here, nobody gets points because it moves along. There are, however, very few ways in which you can move these, and so I do appreciate that about the game. There is only one spot on the entire wheel that will allow you to manipulate these, and only if you've activated that supervisor, and if you build one type of these statues and have a sword available to spend. That's the other way you can manipulate it. I also like the fact that as it moves up, it then comes all the way back around. So if they push it too far away from where you've got majority, at least you have that opportunity to bring it back.
Yeah.
So I really like that. It is more towards that aggressive style of play. Maggie likes that least. I don't find it overly aggressive. I just really like rows and I like rows and columns. I'm an Excel user.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's a spreadsheet. The thing with this is there's quite a lot of points when that scores, and it's going to score 5 times. So in games, like, I'm very bad at keeping an eye on that, so it's endlessly frustrating, particularly because Amy's very good at keeping an eye on that, where it's like round after round, it's like, oh, now she's got another 7 points and another 7 points and another. So it's one of those areas that felt like, oh, but I'm putting so much effort into it, and just because one of those inspectors happened to land, which again, I'll bring it back to thematically, it kind of makes sense because it's like you're only going to get credit for the line that this inspector, is able to see. And so you're like, hey, come over here, check out my line. And you're like, oh, what? But I built all these things and I'm getting nothing for it. So thematically, I'll pay it. That makes sense. Experientially, as a more like multiplayer solitaire enjoyer, I don't enjoy it as much. Yeah.
But I've really buried the lead in this review because this game, I have to say, I think this game is a contender for my favorite game of 2022.
Wow.
It's definitely going to be up there in the top list of my consideration for this year. I just think, well, what do I like about this game? The first thing and the main thing I like about this game is the design. Everything about this design is thought through. There is nothing on this board that doesn't have a point or reason for being. There's nothing here that is not important or that you can ignore completely. You know, this puzzle is super interesting. It becomes really competitive and super interactive, which is exactly what I love in a game. The specialists, they're like something you can throw in to change that puzzle, which people might not be expecting, but as you start building more of them, it gets more and more expensive, so it gets harder for people to do that. Then these supervisors, they give players unique abilities almost, because you're deciding which of those you're going to have to pick and choose what you unlock because they get super expensive, and that's going to give people slight advantages in different areas throughout the game. And then the wheel itself, which I thought it would have a lot of AP involved, but it really doesn't. But what it does have is that classic Euro worker placement tension. I love worker placement. I love action selection. And so it's two of my favorite things in one. And I just really love the way that comes together in a way that it looks complex, but is actually quite simple and easy to understand. I also love these I love a race objective too, or like a majority objective, or something to aim for. And also the fact that these are revealed at the beginning of the game, so I know exactly what I need to do to score in the 5th round at the beginning of the game. That's really cool, and it just gives you such a sense of purpose. I really enjoy this game.
A lot of direction, and I also really like how, even though it's a fairly simple game to wrap your head around, and you know, you're essentially doing the same thing every time you play it. It surprisingly, this one element brings a lot of replayability, because every new combination of tiles gives you a completely new spin or objective throughout the different rounds. And again, you always I always find myself sort of, okay, well, I'm working towards the immediate goal, but also I need to start, you know, working my way towards that longer term one that's going to bring in quite a number of points. So that,
yeah, and it's not just that, but also depending on what the objective is, can change the flow of your game as well. Because, for example, here you can see in the first round it's the most coin, and so that means instead of spending your coin, you might try and bank as much coin as possible. So you're going in all the spots where you can collect coins, and that means that you're really rich for the rest of the rounds after that.
Cash-rich economy.
Which means that you're going to be able to turn the wheel more. You're going to be able to spend more on different things. And so I just think that is really interesting, you know, parts where you need to store clay and then you'll have lots to spend. It changes the ebb and flow of resources in the game, and I think that's really interesting.
I think overall for me, this is a game that I enjoy, not as much as Amy enjoys it, even though I can really appreciate, you know, some of the thematic nods and things that have been planted in there and put there for your, you know, thematic enjoyment. I think for me, the area where I struggle is, like, I love all the Euro-iness of, you know, I'm building this thing over, I'm putting my worker placement positions, and I'm kind of banking with these kind of the supervisors areas, and I'm working towards my longer term objectives. I love seeing that the mausoleum with all those soldiers and that army come to life. I don't love those inspectors moving around and affecting the scoring so drastically from round to round, because it does add up quite a fair bit, and it actually feels quite tug-of-war-ish and a lot more confrontational than what I'm usually used to, or what I usually enjoy more. So it's kind of like, just let me live my Euro-y life. You know, if I make something and I know that it's got points, I'll just live with those points, but don't give me other surprise points that can shift at the whim of, you know, at the whim of the other players, like shifting things around. So that's the area that I struggle with the most. Again, that's from a personal preference in terms of gameplay, not because there's anything inherently wrong with it. I do also enjoy with these. I can never remember whether, like, are these the specialists?
I know, the ThinkerThemer, these are the specialists, yeah.
Because it's like, how's that a specialist?
These are like musicians.
I don't know. So yeah. So anyways, I love the musician, and that makes sense because, well, one, because I love music, but also the fact that when you place that musician, everyone on that row and column is going to get points. So in every every round, at the end of every round. And so that's kind of signifying, I'm imagining the people who are within ear range of that musician, they're enjoying themselves.
Yeah,
so
because we all know music doesn't travel diagonally.
Exactly. It doesn't go in all directions. It only goes in one direction, this way, and it only works orthogonally.
That's right. But I do actually want to talk about one element, another element that I really love about this game is the thoughtfulness of these miniatures in particular, because the bases of these miniatures give you a reminder of what this specialist actually does. So because this one influences the rows and columns, you can see it's got this cross on the back. This one is saying that, the direction that it's facing or the statue that it's facing, it's going to add influence to. This one wants to be surrounded, so it's got this surrounding arrows all the way around it. Yeah. And obviously the horses are long and stretchy and it covers exactly 3 squares.
And I like that you also have your reminder of like essentially what they do or their scoring. So, if some of them are going to be scoring only at the end of the game, or some of them are going to be scoring throughout the game. What I didn't enjoy as much, or one little nitpicky thing, is that there's no reminder on the board of how that end game scoring with the clusters is going to work.
Or the end of round scoring as well.
Yeah, that's true. There's actually no visual reminder of like, oh, that's right. So at the end of the round, like make sure that you do these key things.
Yeah, and the annoying thing is on the back of the rulebook is like a cheat sheet for the iconography, but it doesn't include what to do at the end of each round from a scoring perspective. So I kept having to refer back to, within the scoring part of the rulebook. So I wish they had done that or put it on a card or something, because it is the one part of this game that gets a little bit confusing, is how everything scores. And in your first couple of games, that's going to be the real challenge, is just understanding, what am I trying to do in this puzzle? Who's going to score what? Because there's a couple of different iterations of that. How do specialists impact on that scoring? It's a little bit to get your head around, but I will say that it's very easy to get people up and running with this game super quickly.
It's not a complicated game to learn.
It's not complicated at all. There are 2 main resource types. It's pretty easy to explain what those do. So aside from the puzzle and its scoring, everything else is fairly straightforward. And because the iconography is so strong and so clear, it's a really quick teach, and you wouldn't expect it to be. And it would be remiss of us to neglect to speak about one element of this game, which is quite unique, and this is that storage solution for your miniature statues.
Quite handy.
It is really handy, and it helps not only set up the game a lot faster. In fact, this game is really quick to set up, but also it keeps your miniatures protected, or rather, I laugh because actually the miniatures came to us and they range from slightly bendy to extremely bendy. So we definitely need to get some kind of
leaning tower of pokey soldier.
It really is.
When you put it on the
when it's leaning into each other.
What? Just leave the other soldier alone.
And because of that, they don't quite fit back in here properly. So we're going to have to probably get, some hairdryer action on them to
soften them,
bend them back into place. But I still really appreciate the innovation that went into this box design.
Yeah.
And if you can't tell already, I really, really, really,
you really do.
Really like this game. So I hope you enjoyed this review. If you did, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It helps us to continue making independent game reviews. But otherwise, we'll be back with more content soon. But bye for now.
Thanks.